everyone. Happy International Women's Day. Oh, that's too loud. Thank you so much for being here. I woke up this morning feeling so grateful that it was sunny, feeling so grateful that we're able to actually gather here in person from what feels like a million years into a pandemic. It's been just over 2. I do want to let folks know that we have extra signs and noisemakers just at that table right to my left here. If you would like a sign, you want to make some noise, please feel free to help yourself. You're more than welcome to. So in terms of today and how it's going to roll out, we're going to have a few guest speakers to sort of set the tone for the event. We're then going to be joined by the amazing folks at Rhythms of Resistance to help guide us in some powerful pump-up jams on their drums. We will go through the route of the march with you before we start the march. And then after the march, we'll be coming right back here for some Zumba and hot chocolate so we can get warm after the march. But before we get started, I want to take a few moments to acknowledge the stolen and unceded land in which that we are joining you from today, and extend my gratitude to the land, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors of Treaty 3 and the Dish with One Spoon territory. These lands are home to many dynamic and diverse communities and nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. As settlers, immigrants, descendants, and visitors here today, we honor and respect the many Indigenous peoples of these lands and territories as we hope for a more just future together as treaty people. As we lean into discussions around truth and reconciliation, we must too lean into actionable change and calls for justice. This work requires the acknowledgements of the truth and harms both historically and currently being put onto Indigenous peoples and communities. Actionable change has always been part of International Women's Day, and today and beyond, I encourage all of us to think about the actionable change that we can take to recognize that not all women are created equally. Indigenous women, Black women, and racialized women face the brunt of gender inequality while dealing with intersections of both colonial and racial violence. Today, think about how we can reflect on how we can make our feminism more intersectional and inclusive of the different needs and realities of women, and center not just equality but equity in our work to ensure that barriers are not just being reduced, but they're being eliminated for our collective liberation. So before we get started with our speakers in our march, I just wanted to say a few words about the amazing groups and individuals who have put together this year's International Women's Day with the theme of Break the Bias. My name is Jensen. I use she and they pronouns. I work as the public educator over at Guelph Wellington Women in Crisis, who is a feminist, community-based, not-for-profit organization supporting those who have or are experiencing gender-based violence. We provide shelter and housing supports, counseling and assistance to those who are or have experienced sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and human trafficking. And part of that work is to also work towards preventing violence and dealing with the root causes of gender-based violence and gender inequality. And what that means is engaging youth, adults, everyone in between with conversations about consent and healthy relationships, how we can talk about boundaries, challenging sexual harassment at work, and so much more. I'm also joined today by the Zonta Club of Guelph, who advances the status of women through service and advocacy, locally, nationally, and globally. Zonta envisions a world in which women's rights are recognized as human rights, and every woman is able to achieve her full potential and live free from violence. Since 1979, the Zonta Club of Guelph has raised $560,000 for charities, including local women-focused critical social service agencies. I'm also joined today by the amazing folks at the Canadian Federation of University Women, also known as CFUW, who is a nonpartisan, voluntary, self-funded organization with over 100 CFUW clubs located in every province across the country. Since its founding in 1919, CFUW has been working to improve the status of women and to promote human rights, public education, social justice, and peace. Also joined today by the amazing individuals over at ARCH, HIV/AIDS Resources and Community Health, who provides programming, services, education, and support to those living with, affected by, or at risk of HIV and AIDS in Guelph, Wellington County, Dufferin, Grey, and Bruce counties. And finally, I'm joined by the YMCA of Three Rivers, specifically the amazing people who run their youth programs, who help to make our diverse communities healthier and more vibrant. With dignity and respect, their programs and services inspire individuals to reach their full potential. They aspire to build connected and resilient communities and are working to be a leader in challenging systemic bias and barriers by creating and providing equitable access to individuals and communities and supporting their mental and physical well-being. So why are we here today? It's International Women's Day. Can we get a round of applause for that? As I said at the beginning, it's been a long pandemic. We've lived through a lot of historical and continue to live through a lot of historical events. And only through COVID have we been seeing a lot of these women who are the bulk of frontline worker be referred to as heroes. We need that happening every day. We need that to continue beyond this. We don't necessarily just need events like International Women's Day to stop and pause and celebrate the work of women, the achievements, their contributions. The work to advance gender equality must involve everyone, and it must happen all year long. The theme for this year, the theme for this year is breaking the bias. So looking at how we can look at those root causes of gender inequality, those gender roles and stereotypes, and what this has brought up for me and our organizers as we were meeting and planning this event is that as amazing it is to see so many amazing and powerful women here of all generations, it's oftentimes a lot of the time just women who are advocating for gender equality. It needs to be all of us as part of this conversation because it's not just women who benefit from equality, it's all of us. And when we think about other aspects of gender oppression, it's not just sexism, but we're also looking at intersections with things like homophobia and transphobia. And transgender, two-spirit, non-binary, and gender diverse individuals also face unique barriers and harm in this world as the result of their gender identity. And so when we're seeking to break binaries, barriers, and biases, we're advocating for a gender equal future for all of those, regardless of their gender identity. We're seeking to end gender oppression in all of its forms, and while women have primarily been on the other receiving end of that, we need to make sure that in our feminism we're being intersectional, and while there's still so much work that needs to be done in the feminist movement, we need to take whatever victories we've gained from that, whatever privileges we've gained from that, and to advocate for gender equality for those of all gender identities. In any spaces that we occupy, in any space where our voice counts, utilize that voice. For the men here, thank you for being here. Recognize, how you can utilize your privilege to uplift the voices of women at work and in the world. The work to end gender inequality isn't just about paying women more or having women in the room. It's not just about ticking a box. It is about addressing those root causes of gender inequality, breaking those biases, breaking gender roles and stereotypes, institutionalized discrimination, harassment. What we ultimately need to do is to stop the normalization of inequality in all of its forms. Recently, one of my friends asked me, the work that you do around gender-based violence, it must be so heavy, and it is. And the question that was asked was, what keeps you going? And upon reflecting of that, I think what really keeps me going is love. Love for the women I work with, love for the people in my community, love for one another, the people who show up for us, the people who teach us lessons in life. And today is a beautiful reminder that advocacy can be joyous when we do it with love and when we do it together. So that's enough of me speaking. There is room for absolutely everyone in this work, like I said, and male allies are a really crucial part of that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, who is our